Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us this evening Dr. Buck Melton. Buck, it's good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Your opinions are always full of wisdom and perspication, and we'll see what we can talk about tonight.
Well, often wrong, but never in doubt.
Right, that's right. Well, I was pretty horrified. It's a small, more than that. It was just terrible. The Beth Israel event that recently happened in our town, just absolutely disgusting, terrible, and every other thing I could say about it. But why don't you make some comments about that? Are the neo-Nazis upon us? Is this a danger, or what exactly is going on?
It is, yes. And I was out of town over the weekend and was shocked when I got back and heard what had happened. I would like to think that I would have been down at the counter demonstration if I'd been in town and known about it. But yeah, the rise of neo-fascism. It's really getting noticeable, and this is not the only incident I've seen recently, but it's the one that quite literally hits closest to home in many different ways, but also literally. And it just shows that the pressures that America is under, and these really ugly manifestations of tribalism are bubbling up. And it's all the more disturbing because Macon was spared a lot of the really bad violence during the civil rights era. And I think I want to put in a plug here, and this is always what I'd been told. I was trying to remember it, but my father was city attorney in the very early 60s, and he managed to get a lot of the segregation laws off the books while he was city attorney without too much fuss, and that avoided some of like the Selma stuff, the Montgomery stuff, the Terrell County stuff, and so to see it now, 60, 70 years later, outsiders coming in to try to stir this stuff up. Didn't we learn anything from the Nazis and from the Shoah?
Who were? I was sort of a bolt out of the blue for me in any event. I mean, who are these people? Where do they come from? And why do they pick Macon, Georgia? I mean, it's pretty insane. I mean, who were they? I mean,
well, this particular group is, I think, called the Goyim Defense League, and it is straight Nazi racial propaganda.
Yes.
That the Jewish conspiracy is watering down the Aryan genes, and
yes.
We have to stop. I mean, and it's even fascinating because the leader apparently of this group and his minions travel around the country deliberately targeting places to stir up violence. But his name is it's an Italian or Middle Eastern kind of name, and he's very swarthy, which I think is a delicious irony. I mean, he certainly does not appear to be Anglo-Saxon.
Yes.
I forget his name, but yeah, you'd think that we would grow out of this at some point. But I think identity politics has got traditional groups feeling they're coming for us, and we have to speak out in defense, and then it snowballs into Nazism and fascism, and it's just distressing.
Well, I mean, is this problem intrinsic in neuronal function? I mean, them and us, the way the brain perceives differences, the idea that the selfish gene, I want the world to be full of people that are my descendants, aka Genghis Khan. I think he killed 30 million people altogether, and I think he has 200 million inhabitants. So he kills everyone, some sort of a primitive, primate thing, where the alpha chimpanzee kills all the children of another chimpanzee, or it's that kind of instinct is buried deep within us, I think. And we have this cyclical problem between different groups. They just keep happening over and over and over again. And to me, the problem is likely to be more evident as our 8 billion people get closer and closer. And it's easy to look for enemies. out there, and how do we? I mean, I think we discussed this a little bit, but how do we inculcate a sense of national unity or brotherhood, or let's all be friends, let's be happy with each other, and let's exalt the differences. There's no reason to struggle against one another. Is that an impossible goal? And what do you do about it? I mean, what do you do for people that have these terrible viewpoints that have showed up in Macon? What do you do about
Well,
that?
the classical liberal response, and it may be the only response, I don't know, at least coming from our perspective, is that you let them speak up and let the community see just how revolting their ideas are, the marketplace of ideas. And once people see that, they will not buy into it. Whereas if you try too hard to shut it down, it's putting a lid on the pressure cooker, it feeds the fire, it feeds the rage, and then it blows up. So, and I think you see two different approaches. Here the man was arrested for, I think, interfering with public property, hanging up an effigy of a pride color wearing Jewish person on a public stop sign, and he was arrested for that. Whereas up in Marietta, he was not arrested. And maybe,
he went to Marietta.
Yeah, he went straight to Marietta from here, and apparently stopped in Warner Robins before he got here, went into a neighborhood and distributed hate literature.
Wow.
So, but the idea is. You make the problem worse if you try to tamp it down too much. You know, let them vent their spleen. Let the community see that what they're peddling is no good.
See, it seemed to have an opposite effect. I mean, I don't know who was seduced by this particular display of knavery. I mean, I don't know if. Well, it certainly is with us, and as the country becomes more diverse, is that inevitable?
I think
if you have many different groups that are, and a lot of those groups have histories with each other. So I will say this: I was in Colorado hiking, and they had a big Scandinavian folk festival there, which I was pleased to walk around and see the sons of Norway and then the Swedish people. But unbeknownst to me, there's a terrible animosity between the Swedes and Norwegians.
Yes.
I mean, really, these two Scandinavian, they have tremendous. They glower.
I'm sure
maybe
there's
I'm
horrible
exaggerating.
border wars at some point.
I'm exaggerating this slightly, but apparently the Swedes think the Norwegians are real country people and poor relations, and they ran the place for a while. But if the Swedes and Norwegians can be at loggerheads, I mean, what else? I mean, everything is going to be like that, isn't it? The Baptists, the Methodists, yes. I don't know, whatever. The Presbyterians are going to be tensions.
The silliness, we refer to Star Trek on occasion here, and I'm known for giving the Vulcan salute, but one of the most famous early episodes of Star Trek, which aired in either 68 or 69, two aliens come on board the USS Enterprise, and they're both black on one side and bone white on the other.
This is a great show. I was going to quote that in earlier conversation, but you go ahead.
And the title is "Let That Be Your Last Battlefield." And they hate each other.
Yes.
And they're trying to destroy each other. And finally, about halfway into the show, the Enterprise crew says, "Why this hate?"
Don't you know? I remember that. You can't tell?
Yes. He's black on the right side.
That's right.
My people are white on the right side.
Right. That's
and it
funny.
just...
I remember it. I saw it
yes,
back 40 years ago. Great show there.
But another one, there was a movie, black and white, before color movie came in the 50s, but I think black and white is, I'm using it as one of these double entendres, as we say down here. But it's about a soldier who is wounded, takes a head wound, and he's blinded in, I guess, either World War II or Korea. And so they send him to a rehab place, still in the military, for blind veterans. And one of them is black. And they strike up this great friendship. And then the blind white actor uses the N-word and says, I hear they are letting N-words in the Army now. Isn't that ridiculous? And of course, he doesn't know that his new best friend is black.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, it's one of these wake-up moments.
Right. So, you know, I mean, I guess what it brings up is the inevitability of conflict between different groups. We could say the Ukrainians and the Russians are really brothers. Their differences are very, very small, if there are any differences. The same, and it'd really be on the Enterprise. It's similar to that. And indeed, if you really look at the human evolution story, which I think is playing itself out. So we have more or less our species is new. You could say, how long have they been around? The Homo sapiens, 300,000 years. They've had big die-offs. So I guess the big volcano 70,000 years ago almost extinguished the species. So it came down to a very small number of people that are very closely related to one another. And then when people left Africa, they spread around the world. And the first Europeans appeared maybe 40,000 years ago, whatever. And so everyone is really, really closely connected. And so there's been some differentiation, some genetic differentiation over the whatever number, that 2,000 generations. Is that a good number? 2,000 generations separate us from all being the same. And there have been certain changes in our physical appearance and some kind of subtle other biological changes that have happened. And you could say, I can imagine a situation where the brothers said, goodbye, I'll see you later. 40,000 years ago, they shook hands, and one brother took off, headed up to the steppes and then into Europe. The other brother stayed where he was. And then 40,000 years later, the descendants of the brother that left appear on horseback with manacles and whatever, and power, and the brother that stayed there becomes the bondsman of this other person, of this other descendant. And then how are we going to reconcile that set of experiences? So we have subtle differences, subtle DNA and differences, and I would say subtle. One reason being that the DNA interchange has been substantial. So a population that you could call Afro-American, I think we could say this, about a third of their DNA it matches those people that live in Norway, and about 2/3 in Lagos in Nigeria. I mean, so there's a real combination.
Now,
so
was that the case before you get modern transportation? I mean, down to around 1850, 1870, of course there have been mass migration movements throughout history, but in general, exclusive of those, before the railroad, most people are born and die within 100 miles without ever.
Well, I was making the Norwegian and the Lagos story,
yes,
in that a lot of this is sexual exploitation that took place, and it's undeniable. And so when you say you could take the story, well, in regards to reparations or whatever, well, actually the people that had sexual access to people's great-grandmothers were slave owners. So a third of the DNA that came down were from the master class, if you want to say it that way. The same way that Genghis Khan has 100 million descendants. He just impregnated everybody, and that appears to be part of the human psyche. So if you're a dominant group for whatever reason, the normal story has been kill the males, enslave everybody else, and then impregnate the women. That seems to be the story. And so we've had this tremendous genetic cross connection. And if you say what's going to solve the problem, you could say that just this thing continues for another 1,000 years like this. The differences will vanish, as they did in a way in England. If you looked at the Normans coming in, the Anglo-Saxons they're pretty close kindred to start with. But a couple of hundred years later, there had been so much cross-pollination there, it would be impossible to make any differences or very little. And so that's what goes on here. So when the different ethnic groups come in contact with one another, assuming that there's free and open interchange, the natural turn of events is
we get homogenized.
That's right, yeah. And you could even say again, the fact that we have this Neanderthal blood in us. If you're of European or Asian descent, allegedly about 2% of your DNA is Neanderthal. And I've often thought you could make another West Side Story on the steppes. You're on the Eurasian steppes, and the Homo sapien male meets the Neanderthal girl, and they sing a love duet going back and forth. And there are two groups that are against them getting together, but love triumphs the Neanderthal. Well, it may not have actually been like that. It'd be a lot grittier turn of events that allowed this DNA transfer. But so that's where we are. We have this. It
sounds more like gorillas in the mist.
I think so. That's right. I mean,
our close relatives.
The romance is part of the human condition,
yes.
But also just gritty reproductive lust is there as well. So and we have the problem. People have subtle differences with each other, and we sort of talked about that in an earlier show. Filling billets, and who's going to get the billet that is beneficial for everyone. And the other thing to say is, I think the thrusting for mammalian dominance is very powerful. And so people of one ethnic group accepting a lesser position, that's very hard to take, and it's very hard for another ethnic group to give up the pleasures of power and dominance. So it's how one parses this out is a difficult trip. It's difficult to do that.
Yeah, it's always the concept of threat, and it's interesting how, to get back to Temple Beth Israel, the Jewish community has been so uniformly dumped on for 2,000 years. Is it an accident of geography, of genetics? And Christianity has played a big role in this.
A huge role.
Christianity, first of all, the Jews were bad because they were not Christians. Then they were bad because the Christians hadn't let them own land. They had to go into the professions and amass a lot of money, and therefore they were greedy Shylocks. And then when Darwin arrived, it became pure racial and genetic. They're going to pollute the Aryan and Anglo-Saxon gene. If it's not one thing or another, but they are always the other, and we can dump things on them, and obviously, I mean, it's other races as well. In the South, it has been blacks, but yeah, the hatred. What drives the rage?
The brain.
So, yeah.
I would say it's instinctive, and looking at the Jewish experience, I don't know how well I can get into first century theology, but I think, was it the deal whether you're going to be circumscribed or not? And let's see, Paul said, am I right on this? No, you don't have to. And so there's tension as Jesus Christ, how the message was received, and should it be a restrictive kind of thing, or should it be a broader thing? And then if you didn't go along with that, then all these bad things happened to you, and you became the outsider. And being the outsider, there might be, we're talking about subtle genetic differences. It would, if you're in that difficult situation, to be able to survive and pass along your genetic structure, you can't be dim-witted. Yes. If you're dim-witted with the czars, the Cossacks they're walking down the street, and you have to be pretty shrewd to escape their lash. And maybe after a generation, that was a big thing. And also, the whole deal with bar mitzvahs, the intellectual thought the religion had. There's a lot of intellect involved and exalted I mean, there are all these things that happen, and then traveling around from place to place in a period of nationalism.
Yes.
It makes it, and I think one of the things is the Jewish group in Islamic Spain around Cordova.
Oh, yes.
Was they had this tremendous, great experience,
cultural,
and the Islamic religion, despite what the Koran says, which is pretty tough.
Yeah. Was
Koran's
much more tolerant.
Well, no, actually, the
Spain.
Koran, they were very tolerant,
Yeah.
but the Koran's got really rough language in
Yeah,
it. But
yeah.
there was a great time, and
In that
then
community,
the
yeah.
Christians came along, and they forced conversion, and people left, and they went to this and that, and often found getting along with Christians very difficult. I think they were tossed out of England, and Cromwell came back, and you couldn't go to Oxford or Cambridge until 1829 or what. All kinds of infirmities, all kinds of trouble, all kinds of difficulties that have beset that group of people, and that I think we could say that they've sailed through such troubled waters, and they're really made magnificent contributions everywhere. Right?
That's the irony, and it shows that the Nazi element, the anti-Semitic element, maybe is projecting its own feeling of inadequacy. If you've ever read Herman Wouk's book, This Is My God, which is sort of a layman's introduction to the Jewish religion, and Wouk, of course, I think every civilized American ought to read Wouk's work. I mean, he is a tremendous writer. The Caine Mutiny is the greatest work of American
that was
fiction
him.
ever.
Is that
Yes,
right? Really? He was a lawyer.
Yeah, Winds of War and War of Remembrance, with War and Remembrance, which is the American War and Peace.
Yes.
But he once pointed out how if you look at the number of Jews that have ever existed or that exist today, they punch so far above their weight in every field of human endeavor. Yes. It's just amazing. And if you look at Nazi propaganda, the Jews they're stupid, they're slow, they're filthy, they're scheming.
Right.
It's absolutely counterfactual. And the ultimate irony, when Hitler comes to power, when the Nazis come to power, they force the Jews out of the universities all over Germany and then ultimately Eastern Europe. What do? They come here and they build the bomb. So, I mean, it's once again one of these delicious ironies. But
a lot of it is you could say, well, one group's propaganda deal. So I think in a lot of, many things to talk about. We're just passing over important events. But the Nazis, a lot of this came out of the sense of failure, defeat, being cast down by World War I, all the suffering that happened, and also the idea, well, these other countries are better than we are. So, and if you examine the German story, they certainly, what they were accomplishing, being split up for a long while, and they had their period of barbaric dominance, but then you could say they slumbered for a long time as far as world dominance, anything like that. So a lot of this is just pretend rhetoric. And you say, we're the best, and why do we say we're the best? Well, because I say we're the best.
Yes.
And maybe politicians do that now. So we can say, USA, are we really the best? We've got our virtues, and it's important to have a certain self-pride, I think. But are we really, if you look at, are the Chinese doing well, the Japanese, how great are those people? How great are many other countries? Is this delusional to go through one group being better than
Well,
another?
it depends. I mean, if you privilege the concept of individualism, yes, I think we are certainly better than the Chinese, given that. But that's a big if. But another comparison as well. I think the fact that this effigy was dressed in pride colors, it is Pride Month, and another thing that we tend to forget, that the Nazi regime of racial purity was not just anti-Semitic. The Roma people, commonly known as the Gypsies, wholesale slaughtered.
Yes.
If you were black, and there was not a big black African
Well, it wouldn't
population
be good,
in Germany,
right?
but
It
it
was
wouldn't
not
be good
good.
for them.
It was not good, no.
And then what they referred to as sexual deviancy. And if you look at today, there's a huge anti-gay, anti-bi, anti-trans movement going on right now. And once again, it wasn't just this one person in front of Beth Israel. I saw something about 2 weeks ago, I think down in Florida, which of course that's a hotbed right now with DeSantis taking on Disney and Disney Pride, of a group of neo-Nazis flying the swastika on an interstate overpass and yelling down at the crowds.
Really?
So,
Wow.
so yeah, I was talking to a trans friend of mine about a month ago, and he said, you know what the gay agenda is for me? The gay agenda is not getting shot.
That's
I mean,
funny, isn't it? Yeah.
yes, there are a lot of activists. There are a lot of people there that are in your face, but there are a lot of people just saying, just leave me alone and let me live my life. But once again, so the Nazis, were very much down on what they categorized as sexual deviancy, and they subjected these people to extermination too. So.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, I'm no expert on the subject, but how these Nazis appeared in Macon, Georgia. This is terrible, and where do these people, it's the mystery of this going on. But is this really that big of a threat? I'll just ask that question. I mean, or is it just having the potential boogeyman out there? I mean, what purpose does that serve? Or I don't know, I'll just say you're transsexual people or whatever. Do they really feel that threatened? Is anything happening? And it appears to me if something were happening these days, they could get some legal relief, I mean, or whatever. I mean, you just couldn't do something bad to somebody
you can't get
without a response. I mean,
you can't get much relief if you're dead. And there are individual killings. There was the Pulse shooting. There was the fact that we were talking about, just the chilling effect of it, that we were talking before the show, that there was a Pride show, theatrical presentation down in Florida over the weekend, and there was a genuine question, were you taking your life in your hands by going to one of these things? And I think the problem is that the absolute population is growing, which means that the absolute number of, shall we say, misadjusted people are growing, like this Goyim Defense League. And given modern technology, it only takes a handful of people to, if you've got an assault rifle or something, you can do far, far more damage today than could have been done 100 years ago. So it doesn't take much. And there really does seem to be if you look in the MAGA group, and I'm not saying that all MAGA people are against these things, but there seems to be a coincidence of this, and the pushback seems to be increasing. So there's obviously been some violence in the past. If you look at people, there are laws being passed that are attempting to restrict LGBTQT, I can't remember all the numbers, rights. Legislatures seem to be embracing these things, so it's not necessarily what has happened. Also, some things have happened, but if we keep moving in this direction, are more things going to happen? And since the Supreme Court has obviously moved right over the last 5 or 6 years, there's a genuine question. If you see reproductive rights, and if the right to privacy is very heavily tangled up in issues of sexuality. Most privacy issues come down to something doing with sex, either interracial marriage, access to birth control, access to abortion, same-sex marriage. All of these things rest in this thing called the right of privacy. And so the Pride community is saying, the queer community is saying that if we are pulling on some of these threads, which we clearly are, Roe versus Wade being overturned, that bodes ill for the rest of these things, and that would mean queer rights as well. So that's something that has to be considered.
Well, we have a lot of complexities out there. I won't get into too fulsome a discussion on it, but I would say that from what I know of the world, the past 50 years, the country has become far less homogeneous. It's opened doors for different kinds of behavior. The laws are out there, and so the people that were formerly locked up or can walk the streets pretty much unafraid. And that would be my thought about it, is that the situation for that community would be tremendously improved. And there could be some kind of, I guess, blowback, which you would expect, knowing the way people are. I think the protections are pretty substantial, and I haven't really heard of anything excessive, or maybe I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more than you're aware of, and I can get you some stats on that. I think you're right. I think legally speaking, that the queer community, in terms of legal rights and legal protections, is far better off today than it was in the year before Stonewall in 1969. But in terms of the social threat, and once again, I'm saying it's not so much a matter of what has happened, but the direction that we seem to be going in that is worrying.
Well, I mean, everybody's entitled to their anxieties, I think. Well, on that note, Bucky, thanks for being here. We'll have some more interchanges. It's a difficult world we live in, and we'll just try and do our best as our species does, and sail through the difficult times ahead. So thank you for being here. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.